I think I was approximately 5 or 6 at this time. I had a very unique friendship with a very elderly and wonderful trapper named Bill Grady. We are, the place we're living is on, it's a rather famous northern British Columbia ranch called Ball's Ranch, a few miles south of Telegraph Creek. And we rented a small log cabin on that farm, and it was perfectly suited for aircraft because it had a wonderful, wonderful pasture that was groomed just for our little Taylorcraft aircraft. And that is why we were spending time in that area. And every Christmas, my father and mother would invite Bill Grady, who lived about 15 miles away on the Sakine River. Our location was not right on the river, it was about 5 miles from the river. So Bill Grady lived alone, and my father actually, you would say, looked after his needs. He would drop food from the aircraft when he couldn't land. He made sure he had everything he needed. He was probably as old as I am, in his late 70s at the time. And so every Christmas we looked forward to Christmas and the arrival of Bill Grady. And I want you to envision this little log cabin. There was no Christmas tree, no Christmas decorations, no toys wrapped in paper and things like this. Our lives were very, very simple, very simple. And Bill just brought a breath of fresh air with him, and he had a 3-dog team that I was very fond of. So this was a special occasion. And he arrived on time, and we had a meal in the evening. And then, because we really, my brother and I, were really interested in what Santa Claus was going to bring us, because he always did bring us something. And so we wanted to go to bed very early. And my father took our largest stockings from us. They were wool lumberjack stockings, and he nailed them to the wall. There was no fireplace, nothing fancy like this. And so we put our stockings up and we said goodnight to Bill. He was going to sleep on the lower level. My mother and father and brother and I had commandeered the whole of the half story above, a loft, if you will, and it had a real ladder to go up and down. So we went, and of course my brother Robin and I chatted for a long, long time. It was hard for us to go to sleep. And then we woke up, we had an alarm clock. We insisted on having it right next to us. And so we had the alarm clock, and we were told we could not get up until 5 o'clock. Not possible, not possible. Bill Grady needed his sleep, and he never got up before 6 o'clock. So we waited for 5 o'clock, and we very noisily got down the ladder and went over to our socks, and we both yanked a sock off of the nail, and guess what? It was empty. It was empty. Now, in years before, there would be one mandarin orange and maybe some little candies and some homemade cookies, something like that. No toys or anything else. But we just couldn't believe it. Santa wouldn't do this to us. Not possible. What's going on? And then over in the corner, Bill heard us and he said, well, you just better start looking around. And that woke up my mother and father, and they crept down the ladder, and Robin and I said, this is ridiculous. The stockings are empty. Santa hasn't come. And Bill says we should look around. And my father clued in right away. And he went over into Bill's boot, and he picked it up and emptied it, and he found a mandarin orange. And we thought this was fabulous, and we went around the whole room then on our hands and knees and looking into containers on the tables and things like this, and we gradually found, walnuts in the shell and candies and things like this, because our Christmas visitor who accompanied Santa Claus was obviously a weasel. Exactly. Yes, we had a resident weasel, but can you imagine the agility of that animal going down a deep stocking that stretched out this long and taking whatever he found down and then going up and hiding it and going back and forth. And apparently Bill hadn't slept very well because this animal, it seemed to him, was going mad doing this enterprise the whole night. So anyway, we had a lovely breakfast, and then excuse me, Bill said that he had to get home early. There was some reason, and I don't remember what it was. And I said to him, can I come to your place with you? And he said, certainly you can. I would like that. And my mother said, oh, no, she's not, no, she's not going anywhere. No, she's not. And my father said, just hold on now. Just hold on. This could be a very, very wonderful experience for her. And of course, we won. And I was bundled up, and I took some pajamas, I remember, and a toothbrush, and I don't think anything else but the clothes I was wearing was bundled into the sled. And we were taking some food that my father had picked up in Telegraph Creek for Bill, so we took that. And then we had a delightful ride with the dogs to the cabin. Where's the picture of the cabin, my helper? Has she disappeared? No. Oh, good girl. Thank you. So I have a small picture of a very small cabin, if you can see it. And I just needed you to see that it was very simple. Everything was so simple. Not a lot of frou-ha-ha to the lives of people at that time. You simply did not flaunt your wealth, and you just enjoyed what nature was offering you. So I had been to the cabin before. This was not the first time, but I had never been in winter on dog sled, and my father had often, I had accompanied him with the telegraph, so I knew what to expect. But Bill kept saying, I'm so happy that I finally have a visitor, because there's something special you can look forward to, something very special in my life, and I can't wait until you see what it is. I have to take a drink. So the dogs got fed and bedded down in their houses, and we went into Bill's house and built the fire. And my bed was up there's no loft. It was up quite high, like a bunk bed, and I was to sleep there in a sleeping bag, which I had taken to. And then Bill cooked some dinner for us. And while he was fussing around in the kitchen, he said, I want to prepare you for what's going to happen tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. And I think you have to listen very, very carefully. I think you can get an idea of what kind of child I was when he had to speak to me like this. So he said, you have to stay in your bunk, very, very quiet as a mouse. And I'm going to get up, and I will prepare something tonight, and in the morning at 6 o'clock, I will cook something in the oven. And then when that is done, I will get you out of bed, and you can put your parka and your books, your boots and scarves on, and you can go out with me onto the porch, and you must be absolutely silent. And if you are not absolutely silent, it'll just ruin everything. I couldn't imagine. It sounded really exciting. And I thought, oh gosh, another weasel or another Santa who, what is this thing? And he, I was able to have one eye on him in the morning when I watched him. He was making biscuits. I know what biscuits look like when you've got them in the bowl and you're making biscuits, because my mother made them every day. And he had the biscuit dough in front of him, and then he spread it out with a rolling pin. So still quite fat, half an inch deep, I would say. And then he took tiny lids from things like vanilla extract bottles, the caps. That was the smallest thing, and he cut out a little biscuit with that, and then bigger ones, and bigger ones, and bigger ones, until the biggest one was about 4 inches across. And he put them all very carefully. I watched him in this big cookie sheet, put them in the oven, and about 15 minutes later, he said, okay, you can come down now, get dressed, get your things on, we're ready to go. But be very, very quiet when the door is open. Oh boy, you can imagine what was going through my head. So he opened the door, and I held on to him, and I walked right behind him so I couldn't be seen. And I did manage to just lean out a little bit, and yes, there was something going on out there on this porch. There was a railing, the usual 3 feet high or so. And he went to the railing, and he put the baking tin on the railing. And then he took the smallest little biscuit, and he put it on the end of his finger. And you won't believe the chickadee that flew down, sat on the finger, and flew off with his biscuit. And then he'd do it again, maybe another bird of some kind, but definitely I remembered the Canada jays, because they're so much bigger and they're so noisy, and they had to wait. And if they tried to miss their turn, and everything was done in turn, they did that every single day, so they knew, they knew. And so the Whiskey Jacks would come in for their biscuit. There were rabbits, there were flying squirrels and red squirrels. There was a red fox, I kid you not, a red fox, who stayed about 20 feet away in the snow, very, very cautious, but just standing there. He would not come for a biscuit, but at the very end, Bill would throw him a biscuit, and he'd take his biscuit, and off he would go. It was mesmerizing. The whole thing was, I forgot about keeping quiet, but I was stunned into silence. I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I had never imagined that you could tame birds and animals to that extent that they would trust you and come every day for a meal. Well, after that, he said, the second surprise this morning is that you're going to visit some people. Well, not really people, but small animals. So we went around, he had stamped out in the snow a little trail to a little shack that is in that original picture that I passed around. And he pushed the door open, and it opened inward, and it was hard to open. And he said, "You must be very, very quiet. Don't talk. Don't even whisper." I couldn't imagine what would be. I mean, I knew bears hibernated. Could it be a bear? I don't know. We walked in, and I didn't see anything. It was very dark. It was just the door light. And I looked, and all of a sudden, I looked up, and the ceiling was covered with bats. Covered with bats. Countless bats. Must have been hundreds and hundreds of bats hibernating. And he said that they had been there ever since he had built that cabin. They were a constant friend coming and staying the winter up there. And scientists at that time actually denied that we had any bats here at all, especially those that would winter over. So they said, no, it can't be possible. So I'm telling you, I saw it with my eyes, and it was possible. So the next day, late that same day, my father came in the Taylor craft, and Bill had to fix up the runway a little bit. It had snow in the night, so he tramped out, and my father did some circuits, and then landed, didn't even shut the engine off, just threw the groceries that he was carrying onto the ground for Bill to pick up, and waved to Bill and said, "I'll see you in Telegraph Creek." Then my father told me on the way home what he meant. I said, what do you mean in Telegraph Creek? And my father said, well, I've made an arrangement that Bill and I have agreed that he cannot live alone any longer in that cabin. And I have found our family a delightful log house in Telegraph Creek to live in. And about 200 meters away, down at the bottom of the hill, a cottage for Bill Grady. And so the arrangement was made to close down the cabin on the river. He would go every summer briefly, but he never spent another winter there. And we moved him to Telegraph Creek, and my new life started in a village full of people. At Ball's Ranch, there was a family, the Ball family were there, but they were very distant, and we were not to interfere in their lives at all, mainly because they had 3 school-aged children, and they were teaching them at home. And so children weren't there to play with you, and they weren't there to be bothered. And so it was literally, we lived our family life completely separate from the people who owned the farm. So Telegraph Creek, I just couldn't imagine how our lives were going to change. We could get a dog, and the planes had a huge advantage there because there was an airstrip. There was the Stikine River to land a plane on, although a very, very strong 8-knot river it is, a very dangerous one. But my father, I think he liked danger a little bit because he used it often, and he trained people to help him get the plane tied up properly before it came to some bad end. And a lake also, Sawmill Lake. And there was a possibility of school, although I told my father that you agreed with me that I did not have to go to school if I could go to your school and study with you. So he said, we'll see, we'll just see. And when you get to town and you see all these children and they're all going to school, you might change your mind. So I didn't know about that. I was fluent in Tahltan, which was the language of the First Nations in Telegraph Creek. And that was a huge, huge bonus for me because we could talk freely with the elders and with the other children. And my life did change drastically. My goodness sakes, that was like heaven. although I really enjoyed a remote cabin at Walls Ranch. But being in a community, a village of people who were trappers and hunters like my father was, and they just had an incredibly different, lively life to the one that I had experienced on the ranch. So it was a very exciting time. And one of the first people I met in town was Father Mouchet. And lots of people here, I'm sure, know who Father Mouchet was. The man who started the test program here, the ski program in the Yukon. Many Yukoners adopted him and think that they like to say that Father Mouchet started his life from France in the Yukon. That's not true. No, he started in Telegraph Creek, and he was a very busy man. And it was there that he was given dispensation from his oblate order to concentrate on the well-being and nurturing of children and not do his priestly duties. And so he taught us how to make short 20-inch skis. The hills were very steep in Telegraph Creek, and we could fasten them on our moccasins and just zip around that town, you wouldn't believe. And the days, winter or summer, the difference in my life was that I could go out the door of my home. My father was usually not there. My father was a very, very busy man. We had 4 Christmases in my lifetime together because he was on a contract someplace in the north. So now I've lost my chain of
skis.
Brought me?
Skis. You went out your front door.
Pardon?
You went out the front door.
I went out the front door.
With skis.
I was 6 o'clock. I was at 6 o'clock allowed. My father said, no, at 6 o'clock, it's a good time for you to go out and visit. All the children did. All the children went out of their homes and looked for people doing interesting things and attached themselves to these elders. And the days were so exciting because the women were doing things like gathering plants or herbs or medicinal plants and berries, of course. And the men were usually fishing or hunting or building something. And so the freedom we had, we were quite protected. We were, had people keeping their eyes open all the time. And we just had a marvelous time. Our days were so full. It was just enchanting for someone who had been alone for quite a long time.
Bonnie?
Yes?
I'm forced to interrupt to let you know that you are a little bit more than halfway through your time.
Okay.
And so I thought I would let you know that and ensure that you tell us your aviation story and let us know who your dad is.
I might be able to get to it if I could talk really, really fast. So hold your hands. Here we go. I was going to tell them a short story, and thanks, Arlen, about going down the Stikine River on the paddle wheeler, the Hazel Bee. I sneaked aboard as a stowaway when I was 8, and I needed an adventure. And I planned it thoroughly. My father would ask me so many questions when I got back. How did you plan it? How long did it take? What was this decision for? This sort of thing. So I sneaked on the boat when they were loading it or unloading it. It came up to Telegraph Creek from Wrangell every 4 days. And I knew the schedule, I knew all of what I had to do to make this happen, sight unseen. I hid behind empty barrels in the bottom deck, and I knew that if we got 4 hours downriver, the boat wouldn't have enough fuel to get back to Telegraph. So we'd safely get to Wrangell, where I was going to catch crabs and dig for clams and all that stuff. And so I successfully ate my little treats that I had squirreled away, and I had something to drink, and I won't tell you how I did it, but I managed to pee in a safe place. 4 hours is a long time when you're young, you know. 4 hours is a long time. And then I looked at my watch, and I ran upstairs to the wheelhouse, and I said, "Hi there, Captain, how are you? Bonnie, what are you doing?" So, unfortunately, we had no telegraph in Telegraph Creek at that time. That's something that perplexes many people. And so, for 4 days, I was missing. And my father was not worried. To his credit, he had faith in what he had counseled me to do. And everybody searched mainly the bodies of water, the Skeen River and Sauna Lake. And I came home, and I had to face my father. He wasn't angry, but my mother's hair apparently turned white overnight. It was perfectly white by the time I got home. But my father took me into his study, and he said, "Now, I need to debrief you." That was the way he spoke. You know, "We need to debrief you now." And so I had to tell him the most remote details about this trip. He is the one who gave me the confidence to explore what I needed to explore. It's a really rare thing to have a parent that is so confident in a child that you are encouraged, not allowed, but encouraged to seek an interesting part of your life. And I just knew that whatever it was, if I did it properly, that I would have a very, very interesting life. Are we out of time, Arlen?
No, not out of time.
One more?
Yes.
Okay, I'm
Tell
gonna.
us, Bonnie, about the time that you had to fly the plane.
Okay, I can do that. I'm a little older. I am about 11 or 12 years. I tried to pin that date down from my dad's diary, and I couldn't find it. When we were living in Watson Lake, and that's where we chartered. Our charter was based after the move to Telegraph Creek. The Canadian government passed a law for people who were flying about had to have a fixed base, and they said to my dad, your base will be Watson Lake. You have no option. You have no, it's done. It's a done deal. So move to Watson Lake. So he kept a beaver down on the tiny little lake. Some of you might know Watson Lake. It's a very small town with a very small lake in town called Y Lake, and that was part of my father's property that he bought and built a big log house. And he had the beaver there most days, but he went down to the plain to move it up to Watson Lake, which is a very big lake, because he felt a windstorm was not a good place for that beaver to be on a tiny lake. It could be damaged for sure. So he said he would need my mother to drive out to the big lake in about half an hour to pick him up. About 15 minutes later, he came through the doorway, and he was holding his left hand, and his left arm was broken. And he just said to me, standing in the open doorway, "Get your jacket, come." And my mother started screaming, crying, and all of this stuff. And so my dad and I walked down to the plane, and as we went, he talked to me about what we had to do. And he said some boys had helped him turn the plane around already, so it was facing out onto the lake. I was going to sit in the pilot's seat. He was going to sit as a passenger, because it was his. I'm wrong now. It was the right arm is gone, and he needed the left to manipulate the throttle. So he had never given me what you would say a lesson. But I'd been in the plane since I was a month old, and not in that plane, but in all kinds of planes since I was a month old. And I would ask questions. How does that work? Why does that work that way? What happens if you do this? What happens if you don't do this? And so I learned to fly that way, and occasionally he'd let me fly for a few minutes during a flight. So he said, "I'll do the throttle, and we're not going to fool around with this. We're going to take a couple of minutes to warm that engine, and then we're going to just make one shot for it, head south. And I'll be with you every second, so you have, just keep really calm and just listen to what I have to say." And he was right. I was quite calm about the little lake, and we took off absolutely fine and made a nice graceful turn and should have been over Watson Lake in about 7 minutes. And I looked down as we approached the lake, and you could see waves on the lake. It was really windy up there. And not only waves, but you could see the fire engines and police vehicles and all kinds of medical things. People lined up on the shoreline. It was going to be a big show, obviously. And boy, did I start to shake then. Wow. It hadn't worried me before. I was quite calm. My dad was a fabulous teacher. That's what he did during the early war, was to teach Commonwealth pilots from around the world flying. And he was a very, very good teacher and very calm. And so he again said, we're only going to do this once, and we're going to get this right. And we did. And I cut the engine, and when we're on the water, cut the engine, and someone grabbed the rope and towed the plane in, and I opened my door to climb down onto the float, and my legs buckled. I didn't realize I was holding in quite a lot. and so and he got out, and my mother was there, of course, wringing her hands with her little white hair, and oh my gosh, you do these things to these children. Okay, is that enough?